What's going on, everybody? This is Mike, and this is Serial at Night, episode number 58. Boy, oh boy, do we have some shit going on again. Actually, we have some of the more normal things going on, right? Jason Schreier wrote another Jackass article, so Jackass journalism's in play. And then I also want to hit on how gamers are the problem. Or even ask the question, are gamers the problem? And I think for the sake of this episode, let's start with the gamers being the problem, because I think we all know that the game media and the quote-unquote journalists in the games media are obviously the problem. But I think gamers, at least over the last, I don't know, 7 to 10 years, have actually become worse. There has been a shift where every time gamers complain about something, because they want to make their voices heard, that shit results end up being the result of their complaining. But this goes back further than just recent loot box controversy and labor controversy and everything else that comes with gaming today, or the console wars that are still going on, which is incredible to me. But there's a pivot point for me at the end of the PS3 era, going into the PS4 era, that really I started to see the shift. And I'm going to be clear, I don't think all gamers are the problem. I don't. But I think, and I feel like, the gamers that get the coverage, they're the problem, right? I don't know if it's 5%, 10%, 20%, but once something hits the internet and gains some steam, companies react to that. And I'm sure they're reacting to numbers. They're obviously reacting to numbers too. But once something really goes viral, companies react to that. And that's recent. But there's a starting point to all of it. And it all started when the PS4 and Xbox One were being announced. And what we started to see, and this was at the end of the PS3 era, was gamers being really cognizant about resolution and frame rates and things that were normally, and I want to be specific here to console gamers. There's a PC gamer aspect to this as well, but I want to be very specific to console gamers at this point. They became very concerned about performance numbers that up to this point were really limited to the PC space. And so we started to see comparisons of, is this 600p or 720p or 1080p? Or is this 700p 60 or 620p? I mean, all of this bullshit. You know, is this 640p? Well, it didn't matter. Just continuously hitting on this resolution versus frame rate, which is very, very, very important. It is very important. And gamers should be cognizant of those things. The difference, though, is when you're paying or only willing to pay $199 for a console, or $299 for a console, or $399 for a console, or $499 for a console, whatever that console, or $599 in the sake of the PS3 at launch, your expectations need to be tempered a little bit. right? The cutting edge performance that console gamers are looking at, or looking for, and expecting at a console release, and every subsequent price drop from that release, is mind-boggling to me. So, when the console comes out, the buzzwords and the expectations that people latch onto for what these consoles are supposed to do doesn't line up with the price you're paying. And as gamers' expectations for performance has risen, their willingness to actually pay for that performance has declined. It's been a constant, we want more, but we want to pay less. Even going against inflation percentages. And we've seen that not only with hardware prices, but games prices. And I'll get to the games in a minute, because that's another area that gamers complained about, and it backfired. But with hardware, you can only fit X amount of hardware into a machine at X price. Because manufacturers will, in a lot of ways, will either break even, make a slightly higher margin on a console or a slightly lower margin on a console if they need to move units. This was even, the Sony did this with the PlayStation 3 when it was $599, because there was no way they were going to make money on the hardware, but they were confident that they were going to be able to turn a profit on accessories and games. And so that was this weird transition of gamers caring about performance specs that they didn't care about prior. And it really came on at the end of the PS3. And that's when the handcuffs really came off. That's what really started to lead to even these arguments about it armed people with more ammunition to have some more of the dumbest, most moronic conversations about performance on a console that I've ever heard. Because if you really, really give a shit about performance, if you really care, you go to the PC. Now, the PC is significantly more expensive, and that's the fucking point. If you don't care enough to go to the PC, then you're just making a decision as far as what provides me with the most value. And that's a fine place to be. That's a fine conversation to have. What provides me with the most value? But when you make that decision, you should stop fucking trying to argue somebody else's decision to decide what provided them with the most value. Okay? So that's where gamers really started to get a foothold into assuming that they were smarter than they probably were. Now, at the same time, another thing happened leading into the PS4 and the Xbox One. For the first time in 3 generations, they kept the price point for games the same. Okay? PS1, MSRP $39.99. PS2, MSRP $49.99. PS3, MSRP $59.99. Now, back on the PS2 machines, and for a little time during the PS3 machines, or the Xbox 360, or the Xbox, right? There was a period, specifically in the PS2 era, and I'm saying PS2 because I don't recall how Xbox did it, but with PlayStation 2, games would come out at $49.99, but they would actually often be on sale for $39.99 for that first week. And I remember this being very, even more so in the case of sports games. The new Madden would come out, it'd be $39.99, right? So, we get to these new systems, the PS4 and the Xbox One. and gamers are adamant that the prices can't raise. At the same time, podcasts became very popular. Very popular. And every podcast was saying game prices cannot get any higher. So we've got this mix of gamers complaining, especially after the PS3 era, that consoles cannot be above $499, and actually $399 was really what we found out that price point to be. And games cannot be above $59.99. Okay, that came from gamers. That was the consumer demand. That they're not willing to spend more than $400 on a console, and they're not willing to spend more than $60 on a game. Now, the truth is, gamers at that time weren't even willing to spend $60 on a game because gamers always need a fucking deal, which is also part of the problem. Okay? And so the new systems come out, and they're not extremely powerful, but they move the needle a little bit. Not close to what you could get on PC, but good enough to get the job done. And in fairness, in a closed ecosystem, we've seen some of the best looking games in games up to that point. I'll be honest with you, Uncharted 4 when it came out was probably one of the best looking video games I'd ever seen in my life. So for that $400 at the time, $300 when that came out, you could get a really great experience, but it didn't stop gamers from complaining again about performance. Now, you go back and you look at pricing. $59 for games. So now, gamers want bigger, better, faster, larger games. Experiences they've never seen before. That's what they want. But they're not willing to pay more for it. And as a matter of fact, they want to pay less for the consoles. So gamers want bigger, larger, better games and cheaper hardware. Well, those are competing priorities. Okay? And so what do companies need to do? Well, companies need to figure out how they can make bigger, larger, better games on consoles that are cheaper, less expensive to make, so on and so forth. And so what happens? Consoles and developers and everybody starts trying to figure out how they can monetize. So, loot boxes come into play. Microtransactions come into play. All of this is a result of gamers wanting more and more and more while paying less and less and less. Now, you can argue to the degree of which these practices are predatory, but that's a different conversation. If the consumer wants more and more and more while trying to pay less and less and less, you need to find creative ways in order to monetize your products in order to support development and maximize profits. Because businesses' main objective is to make money. And in making money, you can then employ your employees, so on and so on. But then gamers decided that they didn't want microtransactions, even if they're non-invasive. Gamers decided they didn't want loot boxes, even if they're non-invasive. So that caused problems. Okay, now you roll into new ways to monetize. Well, gamers don't want that stuff. How can we monetize? Well, day one DLC. How's that sound for everybody? Early access to games. How does that sound for everybody? Multiple tiered levels of day one purchases. How does that sound, everybody? And all of this dials back to gamers wanting more for less. Not being willing to pay more money for more game. And I'm not here to sit here and try to justify some of the business practices that were put in place by gaming hardware manufacturers, developers, so on, so on. But I am here to say that if the consumer is going to demand something, There is an amount of operating revenue that needs to be met, and companies still need to make money, and especially in games, especially in software development, to be specific, there are going to be ebbs and flows to your ability to make revenue. And with that, you need to create surplus when you can, because when you might have low points in your revenue cycle in which you might need to tap into surplus to remain profitable. And so all the while, companies are trying to figure out ways to remain profitable and build the games gamers want, while gamers continue to get upset about the practices that these companies are putting in place, all because they didn't want to pay more than $59.99 for a game. And as a matter of fact, we've also found out that gamers don't even want to spend $59.99 on a game. So it's not just the company's fault. At some point, despite inflation, despite average earning power, average income, despite all of these things, gamers didn't want to pay more for anything. And companies needed to find ways to monetize and support the growing industry that required more people, more talent. Right? More talent's very important here. Because that's a two-edged sword when it leads into the recent layoffs at companies. And the need for contractors, which wasn't really a thing prior to probably PS3. I mean, there were contractors, but it wasn't as big of a deal because there wasn't teams of 500,000 people. Right? It's not realistic for these companies to bring on piles and piles of full-time employees for temporary projects. It's not cost effective. Okay? So when you hear about layoffs and cost-cutting measures at these companies, realize that is a product of people wanting more for less and not willing to spend the revenue on the money on games. It's also has a direct relation to the groupthink and in gaming, to an extent that people, if reviews come out or people come out and have an axe to grind, there's this inconsistency of how games are covered, and the groupthink just latches onto it. Instead of somebody having the ability to evaluate a game on their own on its own merits and decide if it's worth their money, they want to be a part of either the positive conversation or the negative conversation. And if something tanks, especially in games, layoffs are going to happen, because they're operating in a just-in-time revenue stream outside of some of the major companies. And even those companies have budgets they need to hit. And if those budgets aren't hit, they're going to have to cut. And this is all a result of gamers wanting more for less. Because if something doesn't perform, it's going to die and people are going to get laid off. That's just how it works. Now, you continue down that path, and now we have another epidemic, and this goes into mobile gaming, but the mobile gaming maybe was where some of this all started as well. And you're probably saying, Mike, why does this matter for me, mobile gaming? Well, all of those things that you've grown to hate have come from mobile gaming and people's inability to justify purchasing premium products, which also is a console problem. So, Nintendo tried to release a premium priced game in Super Mario Run at $10. Gamers didn't buy it at $10. Guess what happened? The next Nintendo sponsored game in Pokemon Go, free to play. Some microtransactions in there. Guess what happened? Dr. Mario, free to play. Microtransactions in there. You know why? so they can monetize because they have people to pay. They need to monetize. All of this is because gamers can't stop complaining. Everything a gamer complains about, there's going to be a direct correlation to something else that they don't like that's the result of their bitching. It's happened over and over and over. Now, I'm not saying these companies should ignore their base and not listen to what the gamers want, but anytime something happens that is somewhat controversial or is a change in the industry, gamers bitch and complain. Okay? Look at the move to physical media, or from physical media to digital media. You know what that's a result of? That's a result of gamers always bitching and complaining. If something wasn't to their liking, they wanted it fixed. They wanted it tweaked. And I'm not talking about game-breaking bugs. I'm talking about things that they didn't like. Mass Effect 3 was the big one. We're going to patch it. Well, what's the next evolution of that? Day 1 DLC. That's a part of it. Patching stuff in, ever-evolving game worlds, balance patches, so on and so forth. And so you see this where now, because of this ever-evolving thing, because of all of the gamers complaining, what shipped on disc is never even the real product anymore on day one. So if you're complaining about physical versus digital, I can understand the play and trade aspect of that, and you still have that today. But it's just a hybrid model. You're not... What's on the disc is not quality. If you unhook your fucking PlayStation or Xbox from the wall and just try to play what's on the disc, one of two things are going to happen. It's going to install it and let you play it, and it's probably going to be a broken game, which I don't know if that's not excusable to me, but that is part of it. But then the second part is it might not play because there's no internet, right? And you can complain about that all you want. But that's all a result of gamers wanting more, bigger, better at all the time. It is. Now, does some of this have to do with company greed? Sure. Sure does. But I really feel like gamers escalated these issues in a way that they didn't intend to. They thought, we're just going to have our voice and we're going to scream about this shit and things are going to go back to the way they used to be. No. Nope, that's not what happened, and that's not how shit works. Places are going to find ways to make money to meet the demands of the gamer. Right? And now that even rolled into cloud. Because we've now hit a point where gamers' expectations for performance is completely out of line with what they expect to pay on a hardware side. 4K, 8K, which I'm not even going to fucking get into. 60 FPS at 4K, 120 FPS at 4K, variable frame rate refreshes. All this shit costs money. Gamers want it, but they're only willing to pay $299 or $399 for a console. Well, that kind of hardware costs money. And if you're not willing to spend the money, introduce cloud gaming, which is the culmination of everything gamers have bitched about for the last 10 years, but now they don't want that because they don't feel like they own anything. Well, if you don't want to spend money on the games and you don't want to spend money on the fucking hardware, then there's two options left. You go to the cloud where the hardware can scale as needed and you get a fucking subscription service where you don't own anything. But if you want to fucking own things, it costs money. It's not that difficult to understand. Everybody wants a fucking deal, but nobody wants to fucking ever think that if these companies didn't find other ways to monetize, the games would be drastically different than what you're getting right now. You know what I'd rather fucking see? I'd rather see these companies say, fuck it. We're just going to charge $99 for our fucking game. Then gamers would outrage, which is the exact fucking point that just happened. Then you go back to fine, $59.99. Here's your microtransactions. It's absolutely asinine to me. So yes, gamers are the problem. Gamers are the problem. So anyway, now that I got that off my chest, it's time to move on. Because we have another case of jackass journalism and Jason fucking Schreier, however the fuck you pronounce it. He decided to write another assassination piece, this time about Treyarch. I'm not going to read any quotes or anything from this article because it's completely asinine, but it's mind-boggling. So I'm going to say two things. One, people have subtweeted me on Twitter about this, and I see the tweets. I'm talking about people subtweeting, not CC Games, who will come and actually tweet at me. I'm talking about a few people that have subtweeted. Talking about how dumb do I have to be to complain about some of this shit. Here's the thing. I'm going to continue to complain about it and have a voice because these fucking outlets grossly misrepresent the labor practices in contracting, in video games, and in software development. Jason Schreier's latest piece, once again, put a fucking focus on contractors and complaining that contractors aren't getting the benefits they want. Contractors aren't involved in company get-togethers. Contractors feel like second-rate citizens. Like, my God. Contractors aren't employed by the development company, by the studio, because of the fact that game development is temporary and it doesn't make sense to staff a full-time QA department for an entire year or staff 1,000-man development teams for a fucking entire year. Because games and skill sets change from project to project. They don't have any other choice but to contract these resources. Now, here's how it fucking works. Company A has a software project, in this case, video games. They contact contracting agency A, B, and probably C, D, E, and F to say, here are all of the roles we need to fill in a temporary capacity. Those agencies then list and make listings for those roles. And when those listings get created, they don't clearly state what the company is for. Then people apply for those jobs, and in the phone interview with the agency, then they usually tell people what the job is for. Now, these roles are almost always temporary jobs, unless it's attempt to hire, which is a different conversation, but this is games, and that's not usually how it works. You're then explained the role, you're then explained the contract length, and then you have every ability to negotiate your hourly rate. So already, these contracting agencies have taken a ton of work off of the software developer because they're handling all of the hiring and screening and so on and so forth. Then, when they find candidates that might be a fit, they will have them interview with the studio. And these are very low-risk hires, but they provide things for both them and they provide opportunities that might not otherwise exist for the contractors coming in. On the hiring side, on the software side, on the development side, you have a low-risk hire because whether people like it or not, you can cut that resource whenever you need to. That's not a layoff because the person's employed by the fucking contracting agency who probably has another place to place them. When you're working through a contracting agency, you're simply sitting at or placed at the client. You're not employed by them. Your job is to go to that place of work and do the requirements asked of you. If you don't like those requirements or don't like what you're doing, you also can leave at any time and go back to your contracting agency and ask to be placed somewhere else. But there's a huge benefit Because if you go into these companies that you'd otherwise not be able to get a job at, you get exposure and networking that can be incredible for you. Or you can take jobs at these larger companies that will lead to a better full-time position than you would have otherwise. You could go take a 6-month contract at Blizzard, then take actually, let me use local Minneapolis area. We don't have a lot of game development studios around here, but we have very large Fortune 500 companies. And what you could do is go take a 6-month contract at Target, and then a 12-month contract at United Health, and then another 6-month contract at General Mills, and then a 12-month contract at 3M, right? And you're getting exposure to these major large companies that you will eventually be able to write your ticket to whatever company you want to go to. Okay? That's a benefit. Secondly, you're usually going to make more on the hourly side than you would with a full-time position, usually. Okay? Now, that's going to offset some of the benefits your contracting agency doesn't provide you. But that's not the fault of the fucking developers. If you have a problem with the benefits, that argument needs to be taken up with the contracting agency that you agreed to work for, not the software development side. Like, these things are so basic. They're such basic fucking concepts that adults in the internet and fucking gamers can't seem to understand. It's insane to me. And then you've got people like Jason Schreier who write fucking articles about it. Like it's the development studio's problem that they have temporary projects to meet the demands of fucking gamers that require temporary staff in order to get it done. This isn't rocket science. Okay? And sometimes those are the only way to get those jobs. As a matter of fact, it's a smart thing to do. And as far as complaining about I'm not at a company fucking party with people, it's because your agency would have to pay you. You're complaining about your position in life and directing it at whatever fucking client you're placed at when your actual fucking frustration should be pointed at yourself for not negotiating better with the contracting agency. You're not employed by the employer. It's just, it's not that hard to understand. I just cannot believe that these articles continue to come up and people are so fucking stupid that they don't even understand the basics behind contracted workers. Now, the only other aspect, those are called W-2 contract positions, where you work through a third party and you're placed at the client. And the other option is if you're good, and you can do it this way, is you can become a 1099 contractor, which means companies are hiring you directly without an agency. Now, in this instance, you're going to have to pay double taxes because you're going to have to pay your own employment taxes as well as your income taxes. But you can charge a hell of a lot more and you have much more flexibility. You're also responsible then for all of your retirement, 401k, so on and so forth. Right? So if you're a W-2 contractor and you demand maybe $70 an hour, if you're a 1099 contractor, you maybe need to demand $140 an hour. Now, you can do this because if you're a $70 an hour contract worker through a W-2 through an agency, chances are that employer is going to be paying that agency anywhere from $110 to $140 or $150 an hour as well. But they do that because it's still cheaper than the overhead they would go through to hire all of these people as full-time employees, give them benefits, line them up only to lay them off later. It just doesn't make sense for temporary positions. I don't know how else. I just don't understand how this is such a so stupid that people don't understand how this works. People continue to write fucking articles about it. It's insanity. And why do I care? I mean, when people say how stupid of an argument, it isn't a stupid argument when these fucking groupthink gamers and these moron journalists continue to get riled up over this shit when they're grossly misrepresenting the industry and it's causing problems. Again, gamers are the problem because they react to some of this shit in ways and then they complain and then it puts changes in place that isn't good for anybody. You want to put a union in place? You want to eliminate contracted employees? Fair enough. Let's see it, and you're going to see what happens. And then you're going to have something new to complain about. It's absolutely mind-boggling to me that this kind of shit is just, people don't get it. So yeah, it's a big deal. I do get frustrated by it, and I do think people should speak up more. I do think grossly misrepresenting labor and hiring practices and other things in an industry where gamers are so fucking groupthink that they can't see otherwise, yeah, I think it's a problem. I think the constant circle jerk, handoff, hand job fucking ecosystem that everybody wants to live in isn't representative of how these things work. And if these places wanted to have a real conversation and drive change, they could. But instead of trying to do that, they write fucking articles that are just going to get clicks, and then people believe it and start running around like crazy. So I am going to continue to beat this drum over and over and over. And if you don't like it, don't listen to the podcast. If you don't like it, unsubscribe. I don't give a shit, because I do feel like it's important that we continue to try to put some context around these articles. And it's so fucking funny that people will get mad at me for trying to point out the fucking obvious, which should be obvious, and get mad at me for having a problem with it. But nobody has the balls to be mad at a fucking major outlet running with these stories. It's no different than fucking politics. It's no different. Anyway, that's it for me today. That's Serial at Night, episode number 58. See ya.